The wind swept across the tarmac at Nuys Airport, dry and warm, kicking up little bursts of dust that danced against the tires of the black BMW rolling up to Hangar 6. It was just past 8:30 a.m., and Jalen Rhodes stepped out of the car with the calm precision of a man who knew exactly where he was supposed to be. His navy suede jacket hung loosely over a crisp black tee, clean sneakers gleaming faintly in the morning sun, sunglasses tucked into the front of his shirt. He wasn't rushing. Jalen never rushed, but his presence carried weight, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. From the corner of the hangar, a young ramp agent gave him a quick nod before heading toward the rear, where the Gulfstream G280 sat waiting, its stairs lowered, engines being prepped. The aircraft glinted under the California sky, a sleek machine that promised efficiency and exclusivity. Jalen walked toward it with the quiet confidence of someone who had flown this route to Kansas City dozens of times before. His mind was already on the meeting ahead, logistics partners, department restructuring, convincing his CTO to greenlight new hires. Numbers and strategies churned in his head, a silent rhythm he'd mastered years ago. But as his foot hit the first step of the jet's stairs, a voice sliced through the morning air. "Excuse me, sir." Jalen paused, turning slightly. A tall man in his mid-50s strode toward him, aviator sunglasses perched on his nose, flight uniform starched to perfection. His name tag read Captain Turner. The man's face was already set in annoyance, his stride purposeful, like he was intercepting trouble. "Can I help you with something?" Jalen asked, his tone neutral, curious but not defensive. The pilot stopped a few feet away, sizing Jalen up with a look that lingered too long. "This aircraft is scheduled for a private flight. I'm going to need to see some ID and confirmation. We can't allow unauthorized boarding." Jalen blinked, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face before he caught himself. For a moment he thought it might be a joke, but Turner's expression didn't waver. No smile, no uncertainty, just suspicion. "I own that jet," Jalen said, his voice steady. "I'm the one flying to Missouri this morning." Turner's eyes narrowed. "Right, and I'm Elvis." Jalen let out a soft laugh, the kind you give when you're deciding whether to let something slide or push back. "You can call dispatch. My name's on the manifest." The pilot crossed his arms, his posture stiffening. "You expect me to believe you own this jet? Look, I don't care who you say you are. You're not going anywhere near this aircraft until someone above me clears it." He pulled a radio from his belt, turning slightly as he spoke into it, his voice low, like he was trying to confirm Jalen's story, or disprove it. Jalen didn't move. His hands stayed loose at his sides, no shouting, no posturing, just patience. He'd been here before. Not this exact moment, but in situations close enough to feel familiar. Still, something about this one burned differently. The assumption, the dismissal, the way Turner's eyes had scanned him like he was an intruder on his own property. It stung in a way that was hard to name. Turner turned back, his expression unchanged. "Security will be here in 2 minutes. If you're the owner, I'm sure they'll clear it up. You're going to feel real stupid in 2 minutes," Jalen said quietly, his voice carrying a calm that cut deeper than anger. The pilot smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "I doubt it." Jalen stepped back, pulling out his phone. He dialed a contact, and after 2 rings, a voice answered. "Hey, it's me," he said. "You might want to get someone on the radio with your Van Nuys pilot. He's blocking me from boarding. No, he has no idea who I am." A short pause. "Yep, I'll wait." As he ended the call, A black SUV marked security rolled up behind him. Two guards stepped out, scanning the scene before walking toward Turner first. "This guy claims he owns the plane," the pilot said, gesturing toward Jalen. "Refused to show ID. I didn't want to take any chances." One of the guards glanced at Jalen, his brow furrowing for a moment before his posture shifted. Recognition. "Wait, you're Mr. Rhodes." Jalen nodded. "That's right." The guard turned to Turner, his tone firm but polite. "Sir, you might want to get on the line with dispatch. Right now." Turner's face stiffened. He looked from the guard to Jalen, then back again, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't add up. "Wait, you're who?" he asked, the radio still halfway to his mouth. "Rhodes," Jalen replied, his voice even. "Jalen Rhodes." There was a pause, then a soft, skeptical scoff from Turner. "Right, and what? You're some kind of investor?" The way he said investor carried weight, like he was trying to fit Jalen into a box that made sense to him, as if that was the closest acceptable reason someone like Jalen could be standing at the steps of a $20 million jet, claiming ownership. "No," Jalen said, locking eyes with him. "I own the company." The words landed flat, unadorned. Turner didn't flinch, but his certainty seemed to crack, just a little. He let out a breath, like he was tired of whatever game he thought was being played. The security guard, meanwhile, had stepped back, already radioing someone else, his face shifting with urgency. The second guard kept his eyes on Turner now, not Jalen. "I'm not showing you ID." Jalen continued, "Because I don't have to. The company isn't rented. The plane isn't chartered. I own it." Turner shook his head slowly, muttering, "Look, I've been in this business a long time, and I don't take chances when someone shows up without being verified. The way you rolled up, the way you're dressed, it just didn't track." And there it was. The outfit, the attitude, not loud enough, not flashy enough, not old enough, not white enough. Jalen stayed silent for a moment, letting the words hang in the air. Then he spoke, his voice low but piercing. "You ever think maybe you can't recognize power when it doesn't look like what you're used to?" Turner didn't respond. Jalen's phone buzzed in his hand. He stepped away slightly and answered. "Hey," he said. "Yeah, he's still standing here. I'll wait." One of the guards cleared his throat, motioning toward Turner. "You might want to speak with dispatch, sir, now." Still clinging to his authority, Turner raised his radio again. "Base, this is Captain Turner at Hangar 6. I've got a man here claiming he's the owner of Rhodes Air. Name's Jalen Rhodes, says the aircraft is his." There was silence on the other end, then a voice replied, too low for Jalen or the guards to hear. Turner's posture stiffened. "Yes, sir, I understand," he said, his voice quieter now. He turned, his eyes flicking to Jalen, but this time there was something new in his stare. Nervousness. He lowered the radio, lips pressed thin. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "there must have been a miscommunication." Jalen didn't smile. He didn't speak. Turner tried again. "I wasn't informed the owner would be on board today. I didn't think I needed to give anyone a heads up to board my own jet." Jalen said, his tone unchanged, sharp as a blade. The guards stayed still, watching. Everyone seemed to be waiting for Turner to say something smart, something that might salvage the moment, but he didn't have it in him. "I was doing my job," he said, more to the guards than to Jalen, trying to follow protocol. Jalen turned to the SUV. "You all good?" he asked the guard closest to him. The man nodded. "All good, sir." Just then, another voice crackled through Turner's radio, louder this time. Jalen caught the tail end of it. "Stand by. You'll be relieved of duty immediately. Do not proceed with this flight." Turner's eyes widened just slightly. He took a step back, staring at the radio like it had betrayed him. Jalen turned to him. "Now you know," he said, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. But the truth behind Jalen's calm ownership and why he'd bought the company in the first place ran far deeper than this moment. It wasn't just about one pilot's mistake. It was about a lifetime of moments like this, and a decision to change the rules of the game. The confrontation on the tarmac wasn't just a fleeting misunderstanding. It was a spark that illuminated a fire Jalen had been carrying for years. He hadn't always been the man who owned jets and companies. Growing up in Oakland, he'd been the kid who stayed late at the library, poring over books about logistics and systems while his friends played ball. He'd been the teenager who took apart computers just to see how they worked, then put them back together better. He'd been the young man who walked into boardrooms where no one looked like him, where his presence was met with raised eyebrows and subtle shifts in tone. Jalen had built his empire quietly, not because he was shy, but because he understood something most people didn't. Real power doesn't shout, it moves, it buys, it reshapes. By the time he was 35, he'd acquired a logistics firm, a fiber optic network, and a boutique hotel group, all through holding companies that kept his name out of the headlines. He didn't need the spotlight, he needed control. 2 months before the Van Nuys incident, Jalen had been on a different private flight, this time as a client. It was a charter out of Phoenix, and the pilot's tone had carried the same undercurrent of doubt Turner's had. It wasn't overt. No one called security, but the clipped welcome aboard, the way the crew spoke to his assistant instead of him, the subtle assumption that he was out of place, it all added up. Jalen didn't complain. He never did. But when he got home that night, he poured a glass of scotch and stared at the wall for a long time. Then he called his lawyer, Maxine Gwen. "Find out who owns that air charter company," he'd said. Discreetly, "I want it within a month." Maxine didn't question him. She knew Jalen's moves. Methodical, precise, always 3 steps ahead. 6 weeks later, he owned Rhodes Aviation, 6 jets, a full operating team, and a board that answered to him. He didn't walk into their headquarters or demand his name on the planes. He didn't need to. The point wasn't ego. It was about changing the rules so that no one else could decide where he belonged. Now, standing on the tarmac, watching Turner try to justify his mistake, Jalen felt that same fire from 2 months ago. It wasn't about the pilot's words, it was about what they revealed. Turner hadn't just misjudged him, he'd dismissed him. And that dismissal wasn't new. It was the same look Jalen had seen in boardrooms, in valet lanes, in pitch meetings where execs leaned toward his assistant instead of him. He never yelled, never made scenes, but he remembered every face. And he made moves. As Turner walked away, his steps dragging toward the terminal, Jalen turned to the jet. The co-pilot, a younger man with a puzzled expression, had stepped halfway down the stairs during the exchange. He hadn't said a word until now. "Sorry about that, Mr. Rhodes," he said softly, stepping aside to clear the path. Jalen studied him for a moment, then gave a single nod. "You flying this today?" "If you want me to, sir, I'm cleared." Jalen walked up the stairs without another word. Inside, the cabin was cool and sleek. Cream leather seats, walnut trim, quiet elegance. He dropped his bag on the seat closest to the front and sat down, rolling up one sleeve as he unlocked his tablet. The aircraft door closed with a firm thud as the crew began pre-flight checks. Jalen stared out the window, not at Turner, not at the tarmac, but at the horizon. He wasn't thinking about the pilot anymore. He was thinking about why he'd bought the company in the first place, not for convenience, not for status, but to ensure that no one could question his place again, not without consequences. The jet began to taxi, the low hum of the engines vibrating beneath the cabin floor. Jalen leaned back, his mind already shifting to the meeting in Kansas City. But as the wheels left the ground, he didn't know that someone on the tarmac had been filming, quietly, from behind a fuel truck. By the time he landed, the clip would be spreading and the world would start talking. The flight to Kansas City was smooth, the kind of uneventful trip Jalen preferred. He spent the first hour reviewing numbers on his tablet, tweaking a presentation for his logistics partners. The co-pilot checked in once, offering coffee, which Jalen declined with a polite shake of his head. Outside, the patchwork of Central California stretched below, gold and green fields, a quiet beauty that felt far removed from the tension of the morning. But the tension wasn't gone. It was waiting, quietly building in the digital ether. By the time the jet touched down in Kansas City, Jalen's phone was buzzing with notifications. 15 missed calls, 3 from his assistant, 1 from Maxine, the rest from unknown numbers. Reporters, probably, or opportunists who smelled a story. Texts poured in from friends and colleagues. Bro, you trending. This you on that jet clip. Tell me you cooked that pilot. He wasn't surprised. Someone was always watching, always filming. That's the world now. A moment doesn't just happen. It's captured, shared, dissected. He opened one of the texts, a link to a 48-second clip. The video was shaky but clear enough. Jalen standing at the base of the jet's stairs, calm and composed, while Turner barked, "I don't care who you say you are. You can't be the owner. Security's on the way." The audio caught Jalen's response too. You ever think maybe you can't recognize power when it doesn't look like what you're used to? That line was already echoing across the internet, shared and reshared with hashtags like #Jalen Rhodes and #private jet owner. Jalen didn't watch the full clip. He didn't need to. He slid into the back of a black SUV waiting outside the Kansas City airport and stared out the window as the city rolled by. The comments, the hashtags, the debates, they didn't matter. What mattered was the truth beneath it all. People only believe what they're used to seeing, and when you don't fit their picture, they question the reality in front of them. At the hotel, he moved through the lobby without lingering. A few guests glanced up from their phones, one woman mouthing, "That's him," as he passed. He didn't slow down, just headed to the elevator and up to the penthouse. Inside, he poured a glass of water and sat at the long table overlooking the city. Maxine had sent another link, this one to a morning news segment. The splits screen showed the tarmac confrontation on one side and a host on the other, saying, "We've just learned that Mr. Jalen Rhodes is not only the owner of the jet, but the entire charter company. That pilot has reportedly been relieved of duty." Jalen muted the video. He didn't need an anchor to tell him what he already knew. He stood, phone in hand, and walked out to the balcony. From this high up, Kansas City looked small, the people invisible. He wasn't looking down on anyone. He was just above the noise. But the noise was growing, and what came next would force him to make a choice. Stay quiet or make it clear that some lines can't be crossed. Jalen didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't the headlines. They came and went like waves. It wasn't the company's image either. If anything, Rhodes Aviation had just gotten more publicity in 12 hours than most startups see in a year. What kept him awake was a decision he hadn't made yet, whether to let the incident fade quietly or make it a line in the sand. He sat alone at the small table in the corner of his Kansas City penthouse, sipping black coffee as dawn crept over the skyline. His laptop glowed with an HR report, a draft of a formal apology from Captain Turner, and a polite request to reconsider his dismissal. Turner had sent it late, probably thinking it would soften the blow. It didn't. The message was careful, polished, but it wasn't apologetic. It was self-preserving. I wasn't informed. I've flown high-level clients for years. This could have been handled differently. Not once did Turner acknowledge the real issue, the assumption that Jalen didn't belong. Not the procedure, not the paperwork. The assumption. Jalen read it twice, then set it aside. He picked up his phone and called Maxine. She answered on the first ring. "Let me guess," she said. "You've made your decision." "Yeah," Jalen said. "He's done." "Want me to put it through quietly?" "No." Jalen leaned back in his chair. "Not this time." There was a pause on the other end. "You sure?" "Yeah. If this were anyone else, he'd already be gone. I'm not about to teach people that your apology matters more than your assumptions." Maxine didn't argue. She understood. "All right, I'll handle it." Jalen ended the call and stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. He wasn't angry, wasn't vengeful, but letting Turner stay would mean that what happened didn't matter, that being dismissed on your own property could be shrugged off with the right excuse. That wasn't going to fly, not in his company. He sent one more message to the operations lead. "Effective today, Captain Turner is permanently removed from duty. Offer him a severance package if HR insists, but we're not keeping him in any capacity." No exclamation point, no emotion, just business. He closed the laptop and walked to the window. The city was waking up now. Cars on the streets, people on sidewalks, morning shows buzzing with takes on the viral clip. Jalen had done what needed to be done, not to make a point, but to protect a standard. In his world, it wasn't enough to build the table. You had to decide who deserved a seat at it. Turner had shown he didn't, not because of one mistake, but because he still didn't get it. Jalen's assistant, Lena, knocked lightly and let herself in, carrying a folder, a tablet, and a paper coffee cup. "Everything good?" she asked, placing the items on the table. "Yeah," Jalen said. "Handled?" She gave him a knowing look, then sat down to go over his schedule. But before she began, she glanced up. "That video, it really hit people. I've never had so many friends text me about my boss." Jalen smirked. "You tell them I'm just a guy who likes jets," she laughed. "I told them you're the reason I started dressing better." They both chuckled, then it was back to work. But what stuck with Jalen wasn't the decision itself, it was what it revealed. The world was full of people who got questioned and people who got trusted, and the difference often came down to assumptions no one admitted making. Back in Oakland 3 days later, the headlines had shifted to a new scandal, a different name, another round of outrage. That's how it goes. But the video kept circulating, quietly persistent. A few million views turned into 15. Clips from the confrontation were stitched into podcasts, think pieces, even reaction videos. Some praised Jalen's calm, others picked it apart, debating his tone, his clothing, his delivery. He didn't respond to any of it. He never did. But something unexpected started happening. Emails began pouring in. Not the usual pitches or partnership proposals, but personal messages. One was from a young man in Minneapolis, a baggage handler who saw himself in Jalen. He wrote about how people at the airport always assumed he didn't know much, how seeing Jalen stand his ground without yelling made him feel seen. Another came from a woman in Arizona who ran a small charter service. She'd faced similar assumptions from her own pilots and thanked Jalen for showing the industry what accountability looked like. There were dozens more, all real, no hashtags or performances. Just people who understood what had happened because it had happened to them. Jalen read each one not because he needed validation, but because they reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten. Being underestimated is exhausting, but it's also a tool. While people are busy sizing you up, you're already buying the building, and that's what he'd done, not just with Rhodes Aviation, but with every move he'd made since he was a kid in Oakland, taking apart computers and putting them back together better. Late that evening, he walked through the empty hangar of Rhodes Aviation's new facility outside Oakland. The air was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breath. A maintenance crew worked on a tail light in the distance. A cleaner waved from across the floor. Jalen walked toward the jet, the one that had sparked it all. He didn't touch it, just looked at it for a long time, its sleek lines catching the dim light of the hangar. He turned and headed toward the exit, pausing by a bulletin board near the employee lounge. It was cluttered with birthday notices, maintenance schedules, and a new flyer with the company's updated mission statement. He hadn't written it, but someone had pulled the words from something he'd said years ago. Respect doesn't come from how loud you speak. It comes from how you carry the silence. Jalen smiled just enough. Outside, the sky was darker now, the air cooler. He unlocked his car, slid into the seat, and drove away without saying a word. The message had already been sent. The emails kept coming over the next few weeks, each one a reminder of why Jalen had made the moves he had. They weren't just about him. They were about everyone who'd ever been doubted in a room they built. He didn't respond to most of them, but he saved them in a folder labeled Perspective. Not for ego, but for clarity. One evening, as he sat on his patio in Oakland, a glass of Lagavulin in hand, he opened a new email. It was from a high school student in Chicago, a kid who'd seen the video and wanted to know how Jalen stayed so calm. "I get mad when people assume things about me," the kid wrote. "How do you not?" Jalen leaned back, staring at the sky. He didn't have an easy answer, but he typed one anyway. You don't stay calm because you're not mad. You stay calm because you know they're wrong and you've got work to do. He hit send, then set the phone down. The city lights blinked in the distance, and for the first time in weeks, Jalen felt the weight lift just a little. Not because the world had changed, but because he'd reminded himself why he kept building. It wasn't about proving who he was. It was about standing firm when someone decided he wasn't enough and letting the truth do the talking. The incident at Van Nuys didn't fade as quickly as Jalen had expected. The video, the hashtags, the news segments, they lingered, weaving themselves into conversations far beyond the aviation industry. Rhodes Aviation saw a surge in bookings, not because of the jets, but because of what the company now represented, a challenge to assumptions, a refusal to accept dismissal as routine. Jalen hadn't planned for the publicity, but he didn't shy away from it either. He'd learned long ago that attention could be a tool, not just a distraction. Back in his Oakland office, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the bay, Jalen sat with Maxine, reviewing the fallout. "We've got 3 new contracts on the table," she said, sliding a tablet across the desk. 2 from tech firms, 1 from a logistics group in Chicago. They all mentioned the video. Jalen raised an eyebrow. "They want to fly with us because of a viral clip." "No," Maxine said, her lips curving into a rare smile. "They want to fly with us because you didn't back down. They see you as someone who gets it. Someone who knows what it's like to be underestimated. Jalen nodded, leaning back in his chair. And the pilot? Turner's gone. Severance package signed. No pushback. HR already got a shortlist for his replacement. I told them to prioritize people who look at passengers, not just paperwork. Good, Jalen said. He didn't ask for details. He trusted Maxine to handle it, just like he always had. The conversation shifted to operations, then to the next acquisition Jalen was eyeing. A data analytics firm with potential to streamline his logistics network. But even as they talked numbers and strategy, Jalen's mind kept circling back to the emails, the ones from strangers who'd seen themselves in his story. They weren't just notes of support. They were proof that the world was watching, not just him, but everyone who carried the same quiet fire. Over the next few months, Jalen made subtle changes at Rhodes Aviation. He didn't overhaul the company, that wasn't his style, but he introduced training programs focused on bias and perception, not just for pilots but for every employee, from ramp agents to executives. He didn't preach or lecture, he let the incident speak for itself. The mission statement on the hangar bulletin board became a guiding principle, printed on employee handbooks and displayed in the corporate office. Respect doesn't come from how loud you speak. It comes from how you carry the silence. The industry took notice. Competitors started revising their own protocols, not because they wanted to, but because clients began asking questions. What's your policy on ensuring fair treatment? Became a standard inquiry, and Rhodes Aviation's response, backed by Jalen's story, set the standard. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The results spoke louder than any press release. One afternoon, Jalen got a call from the young baggage handler in Minneapolis who'd emailed him weeks earlier. The kid had been promoted to a supervisory role, partly because he'd started speaking up after seeing Jalen's video. I used to keep my head down, he said, but you made me realize I don't have to. Jalen listened, then said, you didn't need me to tell you that. You already knew. The kid laughed, a little nervous. Maybe, but seeing it, that's different. Jalen hung up, staring out at the bay. The water was calm, reflecting the late afternoon light. He thought about the kid in Chicago who'd asked how he stayed calm, the woman in Arizona who'd thanked him for showing accountability, the dozens of others who'd reached out. They weren't just thanking him, they were building their own tables, carving out their own spaces, carrying their own silence. That night, Jalen walked through the Oakland hangar again, the same one he'd visited after the incident. It was late, the crews mostly gone, the jets resting under the soft glow of overhead lights. He stopped by the bulletin board, where the mission statement still hung, now joined by a new flyer, a scholarship program for young people from underserved communities, aimed at training the next generation of pilots and aviation professionals. Jalen hadn't announced it publicly. It wasn't about headlines. It was about making sure the next Jalen Rhodes didn't have to fight as hard to be seen. He stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against his skin. The sky was clear, stars just starting to peek through. He unlocked his car, slid into the seat, and drove away. The world would keep talking about him, about the video, about what it all meant. But Jalen didn't need to join the conversation. His moves had already said enough. Years later, the story of the Van Nuys tarmac would still come up in conversations, not as a viral moment, but as a turning point. It wasn't just about a pilot losing his job or a man proving he owned a jet. It was about what happens when you stand firm in the face of doubt, when you build something so undeniable that the world has to rethink its assumptions. Jalen Rhodes didn't set out to be a symbol, but he became one anyway, not because he shouted, but because he stayed quiet, letting his actions carry the weight. He kept building, kept moving, kept carrying the silence that spoke louder than any words. And somewhere, in a hangar, a boardroom, or a classroom, someone else was watching, learning, and stepping into their own power because Jalen had shown them how.
If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.